Are you sure you know the history of the 20th century? You are convinced that World War I was the main event that reshaped the map of the world? We were all made to watch the explosions of shells, the political upheavals, the change of borders, only to distract attention from something much more terrifying, from an event that actually reset human civilization, but which is mentioned in textbooks in just 2 paragraphs of fine print. Have you ever heard the term lethargic encephalitis? Probably not. Or you've heard it in passing, as a strange medical curiosity from a century ago. But what if I told you that it was not a disease? What if it was the most massive operation to shut down the consciousness of millions of people, which official history coyly calls an epidemic, to cover up the traces of artificial intervention? Imagine a picture that sends chills down your spine. It's the year 1916. The world is supposedly engulfed in the flames of war. But in the rear, in completely peaceful cities of Europe, and then across the entire planet, something begins to happen that defies logical explanation. People simply fall asleep. This is not an ordinary sleep. It is a state in which a person turns into a living statue. They breathe. Their hearts beat. They can swallow food if fed with a spoon. But their mind, their will, their soul seem to be unplugged from the socket. Millions of people around the world have suddenly turned into biological objects without consciousness. Official statistics, which, as we know, cannot be trusted, report 5 million dead and millions who have never fully woken up, remaining in a vegetative state for decades. Consider this figure for a moment. 5 million people at the beginning of the 20th century is a colossal number. This is the population of several European countries at that time. And these people did not just pass away from infections. They were erased from reality. Their consciousness was blocked. Why do school textbooks remain silent about this? Why are we told about every battle for an unnamed height, about every signed peace treaty, but silence about the fact that 1/3 of the world's population was at that moment in a state of altered consciousness or deep coma? The answer is simple and terrible. It does not fit into the official picture of the world because it destroys the linear chronology of development. If you start to compare the facts, you will see a frightening pattern that cannot be dismissed as coincidence. The epidemic of the so-called sleeping sickness began precisely when the old world was collapsing. The Russian Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, Ottoman Empire, all of these giants fell during this period. Coincidence? In the world of high politics, global logistics, and resource management, there are no coincidences. A strange disease that turns people into submissive, spineless dolls emerges exactly at the moment when it was necessary to break the old order and build a new, totalitarian, and fully controlled world. Do you not find it strange that the virus, or what they present to us as a virus, acted so selectively? It did not strike the lungs like a common flu. It did not strike the heart. It aimed precisely at the target, the human brain. And not just any part of the brain, but that specific part which is responsible for will and consciousness. It was a lobotomy on a planetary scale. Let us take a closer look at the symptoms, discarding the medical officialdom. The doctors of that time were in panic. They had never seen anything like it. People froze in the most unnatural positions and could remain in them for hours, days, weeks. Medicine calls this catatonia. But the most terrifying thing was not the immobility. The most terrifying thing was in the eyes. Survivors described their state as captivity. They heard everything. They understood everything. They were aware of what was happening around them, but could not move a single finger. They were locked in their own bodies, like in solitary cells. Who could create such a perfect prison for the mind? Nature? Or those who possessed technologies that we are forbidden to know about? Remember that it was during this time, at the beginning of the 20th century, that there was a sharp, inexplicable leap in the development of radio communication and electromagnetic technologies. We are used to thinking that radio is music and news. But what if the first global towers, installed around the world in the 1910s, transmitted not just Morse code? What if 1916 became the year of the first global experiment on the influence of frequencies on the human brain? There is a detail that undermines the official viral theory completely. Look at the photographs from those years. Look closely at the faces of people on the streets of the 1920s. Did you not notice that after this epidemic, the world seems to have been replaced? The architecture changed. The art changed. The people themselves changed. Before the war, before this strange, sleepy illness, we see in the pictures inspired faces, complex architectural forms, incredible attention to detail in clothing and daily life. And after that comes the era of primitivism, the era of concrete, gray boxes and uniform thoughts. It is as if someone pressed the reset button, erased the files of high culture, and loaded a simplified version of the operating system of humanity. Those who woke up after lethargic encephalitis often changed beyond recognition. Children became aggressive. Adults lost their moral bearings. They were no longer the people who had fallen asleep. They were empty shells, ready for the upload of new programs. And the new programs did not take long to appear. Revolutions, dictatorships, the Great Depression. All of this fell on fertile ground in a society that had just experienced a global psychological trauma. Official science identifies the unknown virus as the causative agent. But here is a paradox that confounds any thinking person. The virus has never been found. In 100 years of medical development, with our electron microscopes and genetic analysis, scientists have failed to isolate the agent that put millions to sleep. They tell us, well, it just disappeared, vanished. Do you believe that? A virus that was ravaging people by the thousands suddenly decided it was enough and vanished into oblivion in 1927? That sounds like a fairy tale for naive children. In biology, it does not happen that way. If there is a pathogen, it remains in the population, it mutates, it comes back. But the sleeping sickness disappeared as suddenly as it appeared, as if someone turned off the switch of the generator, or, on the contrary, turned it on to a different power level. We stand on the brink of a grand discovery that could overturn your perception of reality. What if I told you that the epidemic is not over, that it has simply transitioned into another hidden phase? But to understand this, we need to return to the past and dissect every screw of this monstrous machine of will suppression. We must ask the questions that historians are afraid to ask. Who was really behind the scenes of this process? What technologies were employed? And why did the survivors recall strange visions that were identical for everyone, as if they were broadcasting the same movie directly into their brains? Let's set aside emotions and look at the cold facts that would make any analyst's hair stand on end. The official version states that lethargic encephalitis is a viral disease. But here is the first blow to this house of cards of lies. The epidemiology of this disease does not follow the laws of virology at all. Imagine a crowded barrack where soldiers sleep shoulder to shoulder. One gets sick and falls into an endless sleep. By the logic of any infection, be it flu or typhus, within a week the entire barrack should be down. But this did not happen. One got sick, while his neighbor, sleeping 50 centimeters away, remained completely healthy. The virus was not transmitted from person to person via airborne droplets. As it is described to us, outbreaks occurred synchronously in London, New York, Vienna, and Siberia, as if by the command of an invisible conductor. This behavior is not that of a biological agent. This is the behavior of a signal, or the consequences of the global dispersal of a substance that settled unevenly. Remember that it was during these years, from 1915 to 1918, that humanity first in history mass-applied chemical weapons. Tons of chlorine, phosgene, and mustard gas were released into the atmosphere. We are told that the gas dispersed on the battlefields, but the planet's atmosphere is a closed system. Where did those thousands of tons of neurotoxins go? They did not disappear without a trace. They rose to the upper layers, mixed with air currents, and fell as invisible precipitation on peaceful cities. And here is a strange coincidence. The symptoms of poisoning from certain nerve agents and the symptoms of lethargic encephalitis are alarmingly similar. Damage to the central nervous system, disruption of signal transmission from the brain to the muscles, stupor. What if sleeping sickness is not a punishment from nature, but the first global chemical poisoning in history that the authorities decided to disguise as a mysterious virus to avoid responsibility for an ecological disaster of planetary scale? Let us turn to the medical reports of that time, which gather dust in the archives. The famous Viennese doctor Constantine von Economo, after whom this disease would later be named, conducted autopsies on the skulls of deceased patients and discovered something that was hard to comprehend. The inflammation was localized. It affected the gray matter of the midbrain, specifically the hypothalamus. For those who are not strong in anatomy, let me explain. This is the control center of our consciousness, sleep, and wakefulness. As if a sniper had shot exactly at the point that makes a person an active creator, transforming them into a passive observer. The lesions were so specific that they resembled surgical intervention at the cellular level. Natural viruses usually act more coarsely. They cause general inflammation, meningitis, swelling of the entire brain. Here we see a filigree disconnection of higher functions. Who or what possesses such precision? And now compare the demographic maps. Where were the strongest outbreaks? In industrial centers, in densely populated cities, at key points of transportation routes, where the concentration of the population was maximal, where it was necessary to suppress possible resistance from the hungry and war-weary masses. People turned into living statues precisely where they were dangerous to the system. Have you seen the footage of the Chronicle? A person froze with a raised hand, with an open mouth, half a step away. This is not just a dream. This is a failure in the body control matrix. Doctors described cases where patients could catch a thrown ball automatically, reflexively, but could not answer a simple question: what is your name? A rupture between the body and the personality. The body operated like a mechanism, while the personality was blocked. Isn't this the dream of any totalitarian regime? An ideal slave who can perform mechanical work, but is incapable of asking questions like why and how. During this period, another peculiarity occurs, which historians remain silent about: a sharp change in the statistics of mental illnesses. After the end of the epidemic, in the 1920s, asylums for the mentally ill around the world became overcrowded. But not with those who were asleep. Instead, they were filled with those who had carried the illness on their feet. Their character changed. Respectable family men became aggressive psychopaths. Modest women lost their shame. Children stopped learning. Doctors shrugged their shoulders. Post-encephalitic syndrome. But if we look at it more broadly, we see a mass degradation of the cognitive abilities of the population. The level of intellectual discourse in newspapers and literature before 1916 and after 1925 is like night and day. The texts became simpler, music became more primitive, art moved towards abstraction. It was as if humanity's IQ had been forcibly lowered by 20 points. Do you know that many of those who fell asleep in the 16th year awoke only after 10, 20, or even 30 years? Imagine their horror. They closed their eyes in a world where empires existed, where tailcoats were worn and carriages were ridden. And they opened them in a world of concrete, radio, jazz, and totalitarian leaders. For them, only one night had passed. But for the world, an entire era of complete reconfiguration had gone by. These people became living fossils, witnesses to how quickly and harshly the substitution of reality was conducted. Their testimonies were dismissed as the ramblings of madmen. But in their words lies the key to understanding. They claimed that during their endless sleep, they did not simply see darkness. They existed in a strange space where other worlds were shown to them, where they felt someone's presence. Collective hallucinations? Or a connection to a single information network that was rewiring their consciousness while their bodies lay motionless in hospital beds? We are approaching a boundary beyond which official science is powerless. Why did the medications not work? Why, after decades, was the only thing that helped at all drugs that affect dopamine, the neurotransmitter responsible for motivation and will? This means that people had their will stolen, chemically or by wave influence. They were deprived of the main human quality, the ability to act independently. The epidemic of sleeping sickness was the perfect cover for a paradigm shift in the management of humanity. The old world needed to be not just destroyed by war, it needed to be erased from memory. And what could be more effective than turning off witnesses for 10 years while the scenery changes? But this is only the tip of the iceberg. If you think that only people suffered, you are deeply mistaken. The archives contain data about strange animal behavior in those same years, about mass deaths of livestock without visible reasons, about birds that lost their navigation. It was a planetary-scale impact. And if this was a weapon, who had their finger on the button? The traces lead not to the general staffs of the warring countries, but much higher. There, where the battle is planned not for a piece of land, but for the very essence of human nature. We have approached the most sinister part of this puzzle, where history, technology, and demography collide in an irreconcilable contradiction. If you think that the epidemic of sleeping sickness was a random glitch in human biology, how do you explain the phenomenon of deserted cities? Look at the photographs of world capitals taken between 1916 and 1920. Paris, London, St. Petersburg, New York. Huge boulevards, majestic buildings. But there is not a soul on the streets. Historians feed us tales about the long exposure times of old cameras, which supposedly caused moving people to vanish from the film. But this is a lie for school children. The shadows of trees are clearly visible in these photos. Flags fluttering in the wind can be seen. Even the clouds are outlined. But there are no people. Where have millions of residents gone? They are not at the front, as even neutral cities that did not participate in the war are deserted. The response is frightening in its obviousness. The population was locked up, either in quarantine barracks or in their own homes, immersed in an artificial, lethargic sleep. It was at that moment, while humanity was in a state of forced pause, that the largest substitution of technologies in history occurred. Think about it. Until 1914, the world lived on steam and coal. Horsepower was the mainstay. And suddenly, as if by the wave of a magic wand, in 5 to 7 years, while the world writhed in the agony of war and a sleepy disease, perfect internal combustion engines appeared. Aviation emerged, radio communication, electrification of the entire planet. Who built these factories? Who developed the blueprints? Who stood at the machines when men were fighting and millions of civilians were in a lethargic sleep? The official version of military mobilization of the economy is cracking. It's impossible to make a technological leap 100 years ahead in just a decade with a drained and sick population, unless these technologies were implemented from outside, already ready, while the old population, who remembered a different way of life, was conveniently turned off. Let's talk about the so-called Spanish flu. We are told that the flu claimed between 50 and 100 million lives right after the war. Convenient, isn't it, to attribute all losses to the flu? But the symptoms of the Spanish flu and lethargic encephalitis often overlapped to the point of confusion. What if the Spanish flu was a cover operation, a way to eliminate those whose brains could not handle reprogramming, or those who did not succumb to the calming signal? The doctors of those years got confused with diagnoses. A person could fall into a coma from encephalitis, but the cause of death would be recorded as influenza. It was a grand cleansing of witnesses of a past era. Millions of people, carriers of old culture, traditions, and possibly an entirely different memory of the past, were simply wiped off the face of the earth, and those who remained were either too frightened or too young to remember the truth. But the most terrible evidence lies in the fate of those who still survived, but remained in a state of a statue. In 1969, Dr. Oliver Sacks gave these patients an experimental drug, levodopa, and they woke up after 40 years of sleep. What happened next should have become a global sensation, but it was soon forgotten and pushed out of the information field. These people awoke young inside. They thought it was still 1920. They had not aged mentally. But their reaction to the modern world was telling. They saw in us, the people of the late 20th century, something alien, mechanical, soulless. They said that the world had become dead, despite the abundance of machines and lights. But the most important thing is that after a short time, the drug stopped working, and they turned back into statues again. It was as if the system realized there had been a leak and pulled the switch again. This proves that their state was artificially maintained. Their brains were intact. Their identities were alive. But some external blocker prevented them from controlling their bodies. We are all elements of one chain. And in the 20th century, we simply had our polarity changed. Look at the architecture. Until the 18th, 19th years, palaces were built with ceilings 5 meters high, with stucco work, with arched windows that cannot be made by artisanal means. After the Great Slumber, we began to build concrete boxes. Where have the masters gone? Where have the blueprints gone? Where have the schools of architects gone? They fell asleep and did not wake up. Knowledge was withdrawn. Humanity was left with only the necessary minimum for servicing oil rigs and factories. We live on the ruins of a more advanced civilization, which was destroyed not by atomic bombs, but by a quiet, sweet drowsiness. We are the descendants of those who were primitive enough to survive this purge, or of those who agreed to accept the new rules of the game during the reboot. And now ask yourself the question, why is it exactly now, in our time, that the unknown threats affecting the brain are being talked about again? Why are we being divided and isolated once more? Why are the technologies of neurointerfaces and chip implantation developing at such a fierce pace? The scenario of a century ago is repeating itself. Back then, they tested a global shutdown through chemistry and radio waves. Now they have the internet and new communication standards. Lethargic encephalitis has not disappeared. It is just waiting for a new command. Those people, the millions of sleeping beauties and handsome men of the 20s, were considered expendable material in the eyes of the architects of the New World Order. They were used as biomass for an experiment in separating the soul and body, and the experiment was deemed successful. We walk, we work, we consume. But have we really awoken? Or is our reality just a collective dream imposed on us after the true history was erased in 1917? Now that we have realized the scale of technical and historical falsification, let's look into the darkest abyss of this tragedy. Into that part which concerns not buildings and machines, but our souls. Have you ever felt an inexplicable melancholy while looking at old photographs or passing by majestic buildings of the 19th century? Did you experience a strange sense of loss, as if you had forgotten something incredibly important, something that made life bright and meaningful? This is not just nostalgia. This is the phantom pain of the amputated memory of all humanity. We are all the children of those who endured the great lobotomy of the 20th century, and we carry in our genes the fear and emptiness of that terrible time. Imagine the horror of a mother in 1920. Her son, young, strong, full of hope, returned from the front alive. But one morning, he simply did not wake up. He breathes. He is warm under the blanket, but his gaze is fixed on emptiness. Day after day, she feeds him with a spoon. Year after year. She tells him the news that he does not hear. She sees his muscles atrophying, watching life slip through her fingers. And there are millions of such mothers. It was torture by hope. The authorities said, "Wait, medicine will soon find a solution." But there was no solution. There was only cold observation. Imagine the colossal amount of pain and despair generated during those years. This collective trauma changed the very psychosphere of the planet. We became fearful. We became submissive. We learned to value only basic survival, forgetting about lofty aspirations. Because anyone who tried to soar too high was shot down or put to sleep. This epidemic created the perfect generational gap. Knowledge, traditions, the true history of the kind, all of this is passed from parents to children through live communication. But what if the parents are asleep? What if an entire generation of mentors has been cut off from reality? Children who grew up in the 20s and 30s became cultural orphans. They could be easily manipulated. Any ideology, any false story could be uploaded into their empty heads. This is how the perfect consumer, or the perfect cog in the system, is created. These are people without roots. They do not know who built the cities in which they live. They do not know where the technologies they use came from. Think about the term human resource, which became commonplace in the 20th century. Prior to that, a person was an individual, a creation. After the epidemic of encephalitis lethargica, we became a resource. Oil, coal, people. We were equated with fossil fuels. We were counted, weighed, and sent for processing. Lethargic encephalitis showed elites that human consciousness is not a divine gift, but simply an electrical circuit that can be interrupted. This discovery set free the most monstrous social engineers. Camps, mass repressions, forced psychiatry. All of this is a direct consequence of that experiment. If you can turn off 1 million people and no one will be punished, then you can do anything with people. We ceased to be inviolable. We became livestock on a farm, where the owners sometimes carry out sanitary culling. Doesn't it outrage you that this tragedy is presented to us as a medical curiosity? We are told, it happens, nature is cruel. But this is a lie meant to conceal the crime of the millennium. Look at the statistics on depression and chronic fatigue today. Chronic fatigue syndrome is the scourge of the 21st century. Doctors cannot find the cause. What if this is the echo of that very signal? What if the towers that lulled our ancestors are still operating, just at minimal power, keeping us in a state of half-sleep? We seem to be awake. We go to work, watch series, but we do not live to the fullest. We have no energy for rebellion, for creativity, for creating a new world. We just function. We are kept on a short energy leash. We have exactly as much strength as needed to reach the machine or the office, but not enough to understand who we really are. This causes not just sadness, it should provoke rage. Our potential has been stolen from us. We could have already colonized other planets, lived for 150 years, possessed abilities that today seem like magic. Judging by the remnants of antediluvian technologies, our ancestors were close to this. But we have been pushed back to the Stone Age of consciousness, given gadgets and credit cards in return. We were deceived, handed a surrogate instead of real life. The great sleepy disease has not ended. It has mutated into social apathy. Look around. How many people live on autopilot? Their gaze is vacant. Their movements are mechanical. They are the direct heirs of those victims of 1916. The zombie apocalypse scenario has already been realized, just not in the way it is depicted in movies. In reality, zombies do not eat others. They obediently live according to someone else's schedule. But the scariest part of this story is that we have resigned ourselves. we have accepted this imposed drowsiness as the norm. We believe that being worn out by life by the age of 30 is natural, that not remembering history beyond our grandfather is acceptable. We have forgotten what it means to be truly awake, clear, and free. We have been convinced that we are small people from whom nothing depends. But this is the biggest lie. If we were that insignificant, why would so much effort and resources be spent on lulling us to sleep? Why spray chemicals, build towers, falsify history? This means we have a power that they fear to the point of trembling, a power capable of sweeping away their house of cards in an instant. Look at official science, which smirks and claims that we use only a small part of our brain's capabilities, and that 90% of our DNA is supposedly junk. Do you really believe that nature, this genius architect, would create such a complex biological computer only to run at idle? This is a lie stitched together with white threads. These sleeping genes and neurons are not a flaw of evolution. They are blocked functions. They are the very abilities of regeneration and direct control over reality that we were deprived of during that very operation of the 20th century. We were turned into bio-robots with limited functionality, made to believe that the limit of our dreams is a mortgage and a Friday evening in front of a screen. But even in this semi-conscious state, we manage to create masterpieces, love, and show compassion. Just imagine what we are capable of if we remove this limiter. We are not a herd that needs a shepherd. We are sleeping giants who have been made to believe that they are powerless. That is why the modern informational background has become so dense and intrusive. Have you noticed how unnaturally time has sped up? The endless stream of news, the flickering images, the series of events. This is not just chaos. It resembles a thick veil, a white noise that distracts us from something truly important. As if the environment itself is trying to drown out the questions we have begun to ask more frequently. The effect of that long historical oblivion is gradually weakening. Our collective intuition is starting to break through the layers of years. The old worldview no longer seems so convincing. And to maintain the illusion of familiar reality, civilization is forced to constantly increase the pace, not giving us time to reflect. The threat to established dogmas lies not in loud disputes, but in silence and personal awareness. It is at that very moment when a person suddenly stops amidst the bustle, looks around, and clearly realizes something is not right here. This inner insight cannot be undone. And the more people begin to notice these inconsistencies in the official version of history, the harder it becomes to maintain the old facades, which seem about to collapse under the weight of the revealing truth. We are starting to awaken, and this is what they fear the most. Look at your hands. Do you really believe that this biomechanical masterpiece was created just to hit the keys in an office? Our body is a powerful antenna, a receiver of colossal sensitivity. But someone is very diligently jamming the signal. Remember the ringing in your ears? That very tinnitus heard by millions. Doctors say vessels. But why do all describe this sound as the same high-pitched beep? What if this is the work of the carrier frequency? That very field that keeps our neural network in a state of limited functionality. In 1916, giant towers were built for this. Today, the jammer lies in each of your pockets. We voluntarily carry black mirrors with us. Scrolling, likes, notifications. This is a digital needle, microdoses of dopamine that keep the brain in a state of anxious trance. It seems like we are not sleeping, our eyes are open, but consciousness is narrowed down to 6 inches of screen. This is the modern form of lethargy. Only now it paralyzes not muscles, it paralyzes the will for change. It is enough to go to a remote place where there is no connection, and after 2 days the mind clears up, memory and clarity return. This proves one thing. Our cities are zones of constant technological pressure, a microwave running at low power. And now look at what we eat. The composition of products in the supermarket is not food. It is a chemical table designed to clog receptors and disable the pineal gland, the very third eye that is responsible for intuition and connection with higher planes. For most adults, this organ is turned into stone by the chemistry found in water and toothpaste. We are deliberately made weak. A person is designed to live long and actively, but begins to fall apart by the age of 40. This is the planned obsolescence of the bio-robot. If you spend all your energy on repairing the body, you have no strength left to ask questions about the structure of the world. We have been imposed the most brazen lie, the lie of linear time. We have been convinced that we are the pinnacle of evolution, having crawled out of caves. But then why can't we replicate the technologies used to build St. Isaac's Cathedral or the pyramids? Why do granite embankments laid down hundreds of years ago stand perfectly, while modern tiles crumble within a year? We are not evolving. We are degrading. We live on the ruins of a civilization of titans, using their foundations, yet consider them primitive. Look at our cities from above. This is not architecture for life. This is a schematic of a printed circuit board, where people are merely capacitors in concrete cells. We have been torn from the earth to transform the people into an atomized mass of individuals. But the system is in a panic. It fears the 100th monkey effect, when a critical mass of awakened individuals changes reality for everyone. That is why the screws are being tightened faster. Digital currencies, social rating, biometrics. This is an attempt to build a digital camp before we realize our power. They sell it to us as convenience. Why do you need keys and cards? Just put your hand forward. But the price of this convenience is the complete loss of autonomy. If your house key, wallet, and identity are in a chip that is controlled externally, you no longer belong to yourself. In 1916, our past was taken from us. Now they are trying to take the future. However, there is a nuance that they cannot calculate. The human spirit is not an algorithm. In each of us, there is a spark of the Creator that cannot be extinguished by any chemistry or any emitters. The battle is not fought on battlefields, but for your attention right now. Where you look is where your energy flows. Are you feeding fear by consuming news, or are you creating your life? Any lie is finite. The truth, however, is inevitable, like dawn. The only question is whether you will have the courage to open your eyes when this light strikes the windows, or will you prefer to pull the blanket up higher? Subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the bell so you don't miss new investigations. Many more mysteries and discoveries are ahead. We will continue to search for evidence, ask uncomfortable questions, and explore what official science overlooks. Because the truth is always nearby. You just need to want to see it.